I write upon this parchment in lieu of my abandoned dissertation concerning the nonverbal communicative practices of the Hadzabe tribe, native to the eastern portion of Tanzania. I began graduate school in 1988 at Pennsylvania State University, focusing my scholarship on the microkinesics of heretofore unrecognized and understudied hunter-gatherer tribes. Upon completion of my fourth year, my advisor and I agreed that an ethnography of the Hadzabe tribe would be a safe illustration of my scholastic prowess. It was, unfortunately, merely an informal articulation of my intellectual and emotional demise. I arrived in Tanzania on April 3rd. The common misconception of African countries is a vapid, waste-riddled desert with an inescapable heat and a lack of all technology. However, those assessments are mostly based in ignorant stereotyping. It was a mild 72 degrees Fahrenheit upon my tiny plane's descent, and I will admit, at the time, to a great deal of enthusiasm and anticipation regarding the impending study. I was to spend 6 months, what might be considered a short macro-ethnography with the Hadzabe people. I was to learn their customs, partake in their rituals, and ideally earn enough degree of membership to acquire their consent for interview and periods of observation. My primary research questions involved the extent to which emotional expressions predominantly considered universal in Western cultures have similar patterns and recognitions in highly sequestered villages, such as this one. I digress. Upon arrival, I was quickly greeted by high-ranking priests of the tribe and ushered to my living quarters. It was quite lush, and I remember blushing at the idea that these fine people would be so accommodating to the needs of an interloping Westerner such as myself. I was assured at the onset of my project that the Hadza people were excited to speak and interact with me, which lessened the stress bestowed upon me by my dissertation chair. I began collecting data at once, sitting down with the natives to poke and prod their customs. By the third month of the study, I dare say I was approaching a theoretical saturation, such as the inevitability of grounded theory. However, there was one important space which I had been disallowed from: their church. Now, I completely understood that someone like me would not be allowed to record, take notes, etc. in such a holy place, but my curiosity was feverish. I near pleaded with the elders to allow my presence in their holy space, and after a number of promises made, I was allowed to enter under the condition that I not use anything I saw or heard in my report. I, of course, agreed, and I only share what I'm about to share now because, well, my dissertation is no more, nor am I in many ways. I must describe a bit of my time at the church because it's how I learned of the whole. Like many indigenous tribes, the Hadzabe people worshipped not gods specifically, but rather the sun and moon. From what I gathered, the sun represented the afterlife, and the moon represented the physical presence of overseers, of those who looked on the Hadza people and ensured their protection. Tributes and sacrifices, birds, rodents, such, were sent to Haine, the moon. But in their illustrations, graphics, and tales, there was one other presumably holy entity. It was described in their native language as a great it, a vast chasm of knowledge and space where fears, insecurities, and negative spirits are sent after judgment. Per their description, this was not a place for people. What I mean is, when they die, they do not fear being sent to the hole. Rather, the hole exists as a wastebasket of sorts, a living, breathing gulf where the tribe might dispose of foul, cursed, or otherwise unpleasant items, or auras. The hole was mentioned a number of times in their sacred scripts, and I should mention that I have reached the point where I no longer need to share details of the Hadzabe religion, But the curious thing to me, independent of my nonverbal research, was why, despite its presence, the hole was never spoken about by the people. My gentle inquiry was met with distaste, dare I say, hostility. The tribe that had so gleefully welcomed me into their presence was suddenly sour-faced and uneasy, even at the most mundane gesture to the hole. The shift in temperature was palpable. I was ignored by the bulk of the tribe for nearly a week, and at the end of that time, even then, few would allow me to do my research with them. I was scared that I had hit a dead end, until Octo, an otherwise shunned member by the tribe, beckoned for me to approach him. I was skeptical, but you see, I was desperate to restart my data collection, so I abided. Noctol scolded me for inquiring about the hole. He claimed his own interest in it was the reason so much of the village had refused his company. He did, however, tell me a great deal about the hole. To this point, I had assumed that the story of a cursed pit in the ground was germane to a series of tales, narratives spun over the course of hundreds of years that morphed into a warning for young children, perhaps reminding them of the importance of moving on from negative experiences, but Nocto assured me that the hole was a real place with real danger. He was insistent, so much so that at the end of our conversation he unfurled a dusty, dirtied map, claiming that it was the only relic in the world that could direct me to the hole. He told me he could see me in a burning, desperate desire to go see the hole. But he warned me that should I get too close, I might fall in. I realize now that my ability to translate his words may have been off. I think what he was saying, that is, if I get too close, the hole would pull me in. For 3 days, I considered my options. I knew I would never be able to hike the 15 miles to the hole without both permission and supplies from the tribal elders, and I also knew that this excursion would be a complete departure from the purpose of my journey. Yet, Nocto was right. I had to go. I had to know if it was real. When I approached the tribe elders with my request, I was met with scorn. I was told that I had insulted them by mentioning unholy texts outside the presence of the church, and that to ask specifically for this favor was one worthy of exile to most. I was presented with 2 options. Never speak of the hole again and continue to live and work with the Hazda people, or leave for the hole with no assistance beyond the water and food which I could carry on my back. I set out the next morning. I do not know why I became so incessantly compelled to find this wretched hole, but I knew I could no longer fight my impulses. I had to see it. I had to look upon it and learn that it was merely a ditch in the sand. 15 miles does feel like a lot to walk, but with the appropriate breaks and rests, I made it there in just over 7 hours. I learned, once I made it to the marked spot on Nocto's map, that there would be no road signs, no demarcations of any sort. I was left to wander the space, and that took much longer. I hiked deep into the night, desperately attempting to simultaneously ensure that I was covering new ground, while not departing too far from the annotated location at which I was told the hole lay waiting. I attempted a snake's path through the land, and it was only by the light of my pocket flashlight that I did come upon a sudden, precipitous drop in the gravel plains. In such deep, subsuming darkness, it was hard to tell if I had reached my destination or if I had simply made it to the edge of a plateau. By the position of the moon, it must have been 3 in the morning, so I decided I would rest and reassess my position in the daylight. I awoke to the most lucid of answers to my preponderance. My weary eyes adjusted to find that not only had I found the hole, I was in it. I had been brought into the hole. It was larger than I thought, at least 2 square acres, perhaps only 10 to 15 feet deep, but enough so that I would be unable to climb out without assistance. Looking up, it would have seemed to be a thin, mucousy film coating the entrapment, one that shaded the otherwise bright sun from penetrating into my murky abode. I was completely and entirely trapped in a dayless, nightless, sunken place. The very place I had been instructed not to seek out, and the very place where I would leave my sanity.